What is up, you guys? Welcome to another edition of the Fundamental Health Podcast. I have a question for you, and that question is, do you get organs in your diet? I mean, do you know where all of your nutrients are coming from? Are you missing things? Could you feel better? And the reason that I created Heart and Soil was to get all of you grass-fed, grass-finished, desiccated, that is freeze-dried organs in a capsule to make it easier so that those of you who don't want to eat liver, those of you who don't want to eat these organs can get them in a capsule. And so my strong belief is that by including these organs in your diet, you will feel better, perform better, look better, and really just be a more vital human the way that our ancestors always have been. This is why we say at Heart and Soil, reclaim your birthright to radical health. And I love to share reviews when I'm talking about Heart and Soil. So this is a review for our product, Bone Marrow and Liver, from Danny. And she said the title of this was Every Fit Woman Needs This. I've got chronically low iron. I've been told by a doc that I must supplement, but typical iron supplements cause gut problems. They don't seem to be super bioavailable. It's like my body doesn't even get the benefits of higher iron levels when I take iron. That's where Heart and Soil comes in. It basically saved the day for me. Iron is abundant in offal, especially liver. So if you get dizzy when standing, have cold hands and feet, feel fatigued for no reason, feel both anxiety and lethargy at the same time, have irregular periods, and work out intensely, it might save the day for you too. I honestly don't know how active women in their childbearing years don't supplement with this. She's referring to bone marrow and liver. Living with extremely low iron and thus low energy is not the way to carry on in this life. So this is why we do what we do. It's so cool to see people feeling so much better with supplements like bone marrow and liver and just really thriving and living their life. Life is beautiful. And I hope to be able to create something with these supplements from the best sources that we can, supporting regenerative agriculture that will improve the lives of you, your family, your friends, your children, etc. So check us out, heartandsoil.co. We got a new website. There's offers for free shipping if you get over $120. And we've got a new supplement coming later this month. Check out Whole Package, which has testicles. I know you guys are going to go crazy for this one. You can sign up to be the first notified. And as Danny mentions in this review, check out bone marrow and liver if you have any of those things, low energy, iron deficiency, anemia, any of that stuff. So check us out, heartandsoil.co, and reclaim your birthright to radical health. This week's podcast is a fun one, you guys. It's with Sal from Mind Pump. And if you guys are not familiar, you're missing out. Mind Pump is an amazing podcast, an amazing crew of guys who have decades of experience doing resistance training, overall training with individuals, have seen people fail and succeed on multiple regimens. Sal just wrote a book called The Resistance Training Revolution, and I really enjoyed this conversation with him. I always have appreciated Sal as a person, and he's clearly done his research and knows what works for people in terms of body composition and how you work out. If you've heard me talk about the remembering, you know it's much bigger than just food. It's much bigger than an animal-based diet. It's how we do everything in our lives. And not surprisingly, running at low levels for tons and tons of miles makes us really weak and mostly tired. But that's why Sal wrote this book, The Resistance Training Revolution. We go into all of it in this podcast, and it's really a fun thing. So if you know someone in your life, or you really just want to figure out how to spend your time working out, this is it. It has to do with lifting heavy things. And it's the type of thing I wish my parents knew more of and didn't spend time on recumbent bikes, just whittling away their bodies and getting weaker. Lift heavy things, do stuff like this that Sal suggests in this podcast. It's a great book. Sal is awesome. He's on Instagram, Sal Di Stefano. He's an amazing guy with a lot of good sense of humor. You can see tons of memes on his stories. Anyway, on to the podcast with Sal. Enjoy this one, guys, and don't be led astray by the cardio revolution. You don't want that. You want the resistance training revolution. All right, guys, if you like this podcast, please leave me a review wherever you listen, especially Apple Podcasts. It helps me reach more people and affect lives positively. Every month, I'm going to give away a signed copy of my book to somebody that leaves a review at Apple Podcasts. Thank you in advance. On to the podcast with Sal. Sal, thanks for coming on the podcast, my friend.
Paul, thanks for having me on. One of my favorite people, and it's an honor to be on your podcast.
Oh, man, it's an honor to have you on the podcast. And if anyone is not watching this on video, Sal is wearing a Hale Lobster clean your room shirt, and I think we should talk about how awesome this shirt is to get this podcast started off. So,
Yeah,
tell me about your shirt.
yeah, so I thought it was actually quite brilliant what they did. So Jordan Peterson is probably one of the most mischaracterized people you'll find. And I like a lot of stuff he said. Some of the stuff I might not agree with, but I like most of what he says. But it's crazy how mischaracterized he is. So anyway, someone created a comic book, and in the Marvel universe, the Red Skull is like the arch nemesis of Captain America. He's legit a Nazi. That's how it started, right? So this guy wrote this comic book for Marvel, and the Red Skull came out with his rules for life, and they were eerily similar to Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. And so they were basically painting him as this Nazi, which is funny because one of Jordan Peterson's like life works is to talk about like, you know, how bad that is and what leads to that kind of mentality and, you know, not being a Nazi, not being a communist. And so it's crazy that anyway, so what his daughter did, which I thought was brilliant, is she made t-shirts with lobster on it that looks like the Hydra emblem, which is the emblem of, you know, the Red Skull. But they say lobster because Jordan talks about the lobster's central nervous system, and in the book he connects it to evolution, how humans are, or whatever. Anyway, long story short, they sell these shirts, and the profits go to donate. And so they're going to do that every time somebody does something. They'll spin it, sell it, and donate the proceeds. I thought that was very smart, so I bought the shirt.
Great what Michaela's done with that. That it's such a good way of taking something that's negative and spinning it into a positive. I saw Jordan being characterized as a Nazi with Red Skull, and it was absurd to me. But it is common in today's cancel culture that people get mischaracterized.
They do, and it's very strange. To me, it's a little frightening because I'm actually a fan of politics. I know that sounds funny. I don't like politicians, and I don't like what they do. But I'm a fan of the psychology. I like to study kind of how they do things, and they mischaracterize people all the time. It's part of the game. But I've never seen someone so blatantly like it's the opposite. It would be like if I wrote an article for the New York Times and it said Paul Saladino hates meat and loves vegetables. I did this whole article. It's like the exact opposite of what you talk about. And so it's very strange to me. It's like, wow, they're not even taking what he said and kind of twisting it a little bit. They're just doing the exact opposite, and it's total lies, which is very interesting to me, very strange.
I think that most people, if they saw that characterization of my work, would know that it was BS. But I do get frustrated a little bit when people kind of take things that I say and twist them. Or I certainly have had ideas that have evolved over time, and it's interesting when people sort of try and paint me into a corner. What about you with your work in the fitness space? Do you ever get mischaracterized, or do people ever try and do that to you?
You know, it's funny. I mean, I'm trying to think. So we're typically pretty hard to attack, mainly because we use humor as a way to deliver a lot of our information. Appreciate humor. We love what we make. So it's kind of hard to come after us, and we're also not afraid to, if someone says something, to call them out. And so I think people tend to be afraid to do so. Also, I don't know if we've reached variety to even get that kind of stuff. Although I have heard people say that we're anti-cardio, which is not correct. That's actually quite wrong. We're not anti-cardio. We just are anti-cardio being the cornerstone of your routine if your goal is to maximize fat loss, improve your health, and if you're only going to work out 2 to 3 days a week, which is kind of the average person. That's kind of the context that we're talking about. We're talking about the average person. In that case, we tell people, look, if you only pick one form of exercise and you want to lose fat and improve your insulin sensitivity and strengthen your bones and improve functional flexibility and cognitive performance, all that stuff, pick resistance training, make that the cornerstone. And then if you want to do cardio because you like it or whatever, that's fine. But we've been sold the opposite. So I've heard people say we're anti-cardio. Not true. We just are anti, that's the answer to our health problems, which it definitely isn't. We can get into more of that if you like.
Yeah, let's dig into it. I mean, this is a perfect segue. You've got this book coming out. I think it's already released, The Resistance Training Revolution, which is super fun. I was reading it the last couple of days, and I'm really excited to talk to you about this and dig into it because So I did a podcast with Herman Poncer a few weeks ago, and you mentioned some of his work in the book. We can talk about that. But between the conversation with Herman and this conversation with you, I want to try and give the listeners a couple of different perspectives, or complementary perspectives, I should say, on this age-old question, which everyone is asking: how do I look good naked? How do I lose fat? And I love that in this book you're sort of saying to people, hey, cardio is not how you lose fat. And we can also clarify that this is what you term in the book steady state cardio. So
Right.
why, let's just start with that. Like, why is cardio not a good thing for humans? Because when I go to the gym, and when I'm in Austin and I walk into Lifetime Fitness, there are 4 rows of cardio machines, and there are men and women just sweating their brains out on these things, ellipticizing and treadmilling and doing all kinds of crazy things for cardio. I'm here in Costa Rica now. There's people running on the beach doing steady state cardio every day. There's people running on the road. And I've got to believe that most of the people on these, what I would call torture devices, I mean, a beach is a beautiful place, but I don't know if running on a beach is the best use of a beach, but that they believe that they are somehow getting shredded. So what's going on here? Why is this wrong?
Yeah, so all this misinformation kind of started with this false fitness paradigm that we've been sold for now decades. And it starts like this, right? So most people are interested in fat loss. That's probably the number one goal. And obesity is this kind of umbrella condition that contributes to most, if not all, of our chronic health problems, right? So cancers, for example, obesity contributes to something like 75% of cancer. Of course, heart disease, that's an easy one. Diabetes, insulin resistance, Alzheimer's, dementia, all of them, obesity contributes to quite a bit of them. And it doesn't necessarily have to be obesity, but obesity is the big, kind of the big gorilla in the room that everybody's after. And we've known this for decades now. And it's also the most visible one, right? So people we tend to work out because we want to look better. That's the number one goal. So the fitness paradigm that we've been sold it's based off of some truth. And this is the truth that we base it off of. In order to lose weight, you have to burn more calories than you take in. Or to put it differently, you have to take in less calories than you burn. And that's very true, right? So there's an energy imbalance that you want to create. It's a law of thermodynamics. And that has to happen for fat loss to occur. You don't burn body fat if you're taking in more calories than you burn. It just doesn't work because you have excess calories, and they have to go somewhere. So your body stores it, and of course the fat loss works with the opposite happening. So we know this. And so what they've done, and this is what we've been sold again, is they look at this formula and say, okay, here's the nutrition component. All right, taking less calories. But what about the exercise component? What's the best form of exercise that we can pick that helps with this fat loss problem? And so what they did is they looked at exercise primarily as a method of burning calories. So the value of exercise really, in this case, is how many calories am I burning an hour doing this particular activity? And the one that burns the most calories is the one that is going to be the most valuable. So in that case, in that particular context, cardiovascular activity is definitely the best calorie burner in terms of times of time being done, or when you compare it to other forms of activity. So for example, an hour of cardio will burn more calories than an hour of resistance training. Okay, this is true. Now here's the problem with this particular paradigm. The problem is we're ignoring the most important part of exercise, which is how is this exercise getting my body to change and adapt, right? And what does that mean? Okay, so when you exercise, the reason why your endurance improves when you run often, or the reason why you get stronger when you lift weights, or the reason why your flexibility improves when you stretch, is because your body sees this activity as a stress, right? It identifies it as a stress. So when you exercise, it's hard. You're causing inflammation in the body's expending energy. And so your body's goal is to get better at that particular activity so that the same insult next time doesn't cause the same stress. It's really no different than your skin's ability to tan in the sun, right? I go in the sun, UV rays hit my skin, a little bit of damage happens. My body tries to adapt by darkening. so that the same exposure no longer causes a sunburn. So the adaptation is completely ignored. We just look at the calorie burn. Well, if we look at the adaptation, you actually start to see a much broader picture and a much more accurate picture of what form of exercise we should actually pick. So if we go back to cardiovascular activity does burn a lot of calories while you're doing it. But what it also does is it tells your body to get better at cardio, which requires not much strength. In fact, less muscle actually makes you better at this type of cardio activity because you become more efficient with calories. So your body actually learns to burn less calories. And over time, your metabolism slows down and you actually burn less calories even while you do that particular activity. So the adaptation from cardio actually teaches your body to be more efficient with calories, AKA burn less calories all the time. And so you slow your metabolism down. So when we look at studies on cardio as a method of weight loss when combined with diet, what we see typically on average is about 50% of the weight being lost from fat and 50% of the weight being lost from muscle. So part of the adaptation that comes from lots of cardio is to reduce muscle mass. Again, this is a way for the body to become more efficient and better at that particular activity. So now why is this not a good thing? Well, besides the fact that you're now burning less calories, so over time my metabolism slows down, harder to lose fat, I got to eat less calories now to maintain my lighter weight, you actually didn't really reduce your body fat percentage either. If you lose 10 pounds, 5 comes from fat, 5 comes from muscle, what I've actually done is made myself a smaller, same body fat percentage of myself. I actually haven't changed much. I've just made a smaller, same flabbiness version of myself. But I've also made myself weaker. I've also reduced the tissue that is most effective at improving insulin sensitivity. I've also reduced tissue that burns a tremendous amount of calories. And so what ends up happening when you is the cornerstone of your routine that is designed to burn fat. When that becomes your solution, your weight loss goes down like this initially, half of it muscle, half of it fat, and then you plateau real hard. And then in order to lose any more weight, I have to do more cardio or I have to cut my calories even more. And this is why you see people fail. One of the reasons why you see people all the time. It's like, okay, I lost 20 pounds, but man, just to maintain this, I have to do 6 days a week of 45 minutes of cardio, and I have to eat this like little bit of calories. And I used to be able to eat more, and if I do, I just gain body fat very easily. Now, when we look at resistance training, so like lifting weights or body weight resistance training or bands, resistance training essentially is using resistance in a way to directly build muscle and build strength. Okay, and I want to clarify because you can use resistance in ways that it's more like cardio. Like I could string 15 exercises together and go from one exercise to another. And then what I'm doing is I'm just doing cardio with weight. So when I talk about resistance training, I'm talking about doing it in a way that is designed and programmed to build muscle and build strength. When I do that, yes, I don't burn as many calories as when I do cardio. But what I am doing is I'm sending a signal to my body to get it to get better at lifting weight. What does that mean? More muscle, more strength. What are the side effects of that? A faster metabolism, a better insulin response. In fact, one of the a study just came out. I wasn't even in the book that shows that building muscle, regardless of body weight, building muscle proves insulin sensitivity regardless of body weight. And now this is a very important thing because when we look at the cognitive decline issues that we start to increase, things like Alzheimer's and dementia, a big piece of that probably and most likely has to do with our issues with how we process sugars and glycogen and our sensitivity to insulin. In fact, some researchers call Alzheimer's and dementia type 3 diabetes. So building muscle is protective against all of that. So what does the weight loss look like when resistance training is part of your program? Well, the weight loss starts off slow. By the way, oftentimes what happens is you lose fat and build muscle. So although the scale doesn't move much, what actually happened is I've traded 4 pounds of body fat for 4 pounds of muscle, which by the way means you're smaller. I do want to also explain that. Muscle is very dense. much more dense than body fat. So I think it takes up something like 1/3 less space. So if I lost 5 pounds of body fat but gained 5 pounds of muscle, I would still be smaller. I'd have a smaller waist and just take up less space overall. So when I do that, the weight loss starts off slowly, but then you see this kind of snowball effect as my metabolism speeds up and as I start to burn more calories. Here's the kicker: automatically, all the time. Okay, that means that I can burn 500 more calories a day just by going to work and doing my normal thing. It doesn't require me to actively try to burn all this exercise. And this is through exercise. And this is very important because when we're looking at the average person, and I've trained people for well over 2 decades. Everyday average people was the most common type of person that I trained. So I did train some athletes and I did train some people who were very high fitness, but most of my clients, the vast majority, over 95%, were everyday average people. And towards the end of my career, I got very effective at getting people to be consistent and to make fitness a part of life. But we're going to lie to ourselves if we think we're going to get the everyday average person to exercise every single day. It's just not going to happen. What we can expect is about 2 to 3 days a week. Okay, if we can get the average American or the average person in modern societies to exercise consistently, what we can hope for is about 2 or 3 days a week. Well, 2 or 3 days a week of resistance training is plenty to cause those beneficial adaptations that I just talked about. And, there's so much more, the hormonal effects, for example. Another study, actually, in fact, there was a cardiologist that had me on his podcast because the studies now are supporting everything that you're saying, which we can get into. He said, a study came out that showed that lots of endurance training pretty reliably lowers testosterone in men. Now, in my experience, with lots of cardiovascular activity can cause imbalances in progesterone and estrogen. We can see cortisol start to spike or elevate. Growth hormone, we can start to see that over time start to lower. The resistance training does the opposite. In men, it reliably raises testosterone, even in men with normal testosterone levels. It increases androgen receptor density. That means that the receptors that testosterone attaches to, we actually increase the number of them. So whatever testosterone you have becomes more effective. In women, we tend to see this balancing out of estrogen and progesterone. And we tend to see these more youthful levels of growth hormone and a better cortisol response. And the question that people usually have for me when I talk about this is why? Why does one form of exercise cause these kind of not good hormonal resistance training cause these kind of positive hormonal effects? And the answer is because of the side effects of the adaptation that the exercise is causing in your body. And we can pretty safely characterize resistance training as a pro-tissue form of exercise. And we could safely characterize cardio exercise as a anti-tissue exercise. Okay, so we know the studies show that people lose muscle pretty consistently with cardio being the form of exercise that, their cornerstone of their routine. And we know pretty reliably that resistance training builds muscle pretty consistently, again, if it's the cornerstone of their routine. Building muscle, again, pro-tissue, pro-muscle, building muscle requires anabolic hormones, right? It requires in men testosterone. It requires better insulin sensitivity. It requires a balance of estrogen and progesterone. It requires more youthful levels of growth hormone. When we're reducing muscle, we actually want less testosterone. It's very hard to get a man to lose muscle when you're raising his testosterone at the same time, right? So what the body does is it organizes itself in a way to adapt to these forms of exercise, and lots of cardio to get rid of muscle, and resistance training organizes the body to build muscle, right? So if you're looking for youthful levels of these hormones, and by the way, it feels great when these hormones are you can go to a hormone doctor, with these rejuvenation labs or whatever, and they'll give men testosterone and growth hormone, and women, they'll balance them out, and they'll feel amazing, right? You could do this pretty well naturally just by getting your body to build muscle through resistance training. So the book is really, and I call it the resistance training revolution, because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to shift the common, just kind of the idea around exercise, the stereotype around resistance training, the stigma. I'm trying to educate people in a very easy to understand way that, hey, look, if you want to improve your health, if you want to get lean, if you want to look good, if you want to do it in a way that doesn't require a lot of time and do it in a very effective way that allows you to eat more food, the way you should be working out is with resistance training. It should not be these other forms of exercise.
No, man, I love it. I agree with all that. And I have my personal experience that corroborates it. I wish I had more pictures of how skinny I was, number one, as a vegan, when I was not eating enough protein and was eating zero animal protein. And two, how skinny I was as a vegan who was doing ultra running, and then an omnivore eating a paleo diet doing ultra running. So I was the poster child for steady state chronic cardio over exertion, and I was probably 20 plus pounds lighter. So as a vegan, I was 30 pounds of muscle lighter than I am now. And when I added meat back, I probably gained 5 pounds of muscle, maybe 10 pounds of muscle, but I was 20 pounds of muscle lighter than I am now, just because I was doing a lot of cardio. I was doing ultra endurance running. And thankfully, I stopped that. And I only peed blood once after a run, and have since learned about things like arrhythmogenic right ventricular dysplasia and all sorts of other issues that can happen in the heart when humans do too much cardiovascular sort of steady state chronic cardio. But I love what you said in the book and what you said here. Like, cardio basically makes you a smaller version of yourself with the same body composition. So if you have some pudge around your waist or your hips or your thighs, cardio is not necessarily going to make you lean. It's just going to make you a smaller version that is less effective at burning calories and more effective, because evolutionarily speaking, doesn't this mean if we're doing tons of cardio every day, it sort of means we're being chased by leopards and panthers and tigers all the time?
Yeah, it's funny. They've done studies on this where they'll study modern hunter-gatherers. There's that famous Hadza tribe study. They did another study in the Amazon where they compared children in rural areas to children in modern areas, and the children in the rural areas are much more active, and through some pretty sophisticated testing, looked at how many calories they were burning. And what they found was what actually mirrored what they found with the Hadza tribe study, which is they didn't burn that many more calories. In fact, it was almost equivalent. And that's, by the way, that's not a bad thing. That's a wonderful evolutionary strategy that happened to our bodies. It makes no sense for us to do lots of cardio and burn 7,000 calories a day as hunter-gatherers, where we're constantly moving. By the way, hunter-gatherers, the way they hunt animals is they'll throw something at it, wound it, and then chase it until it gets exhausted. If we were burning 7,000 calories a day, we would have gone extinct thousands of years ago. We can't find 7,000 calories worth of food in those environments. So our bodies learn to become very efficient with calories. So again, it's not a bad thing. It's just in the context of modern life, and this is the important thing to understand here, right? What's the context of modern life? We're very sedentary, but we're also simultaneously very busy. So although we're not moving much, we're also busy. Our schedules are busier than ever. I got, my kids, I got to take them over there, and I got work, and I'm on, doing work at home now because of technology. And so we're very, very busy, but very, very sedentary. We don't have a lot of time to exercise. It's just a fact. And combine that with the fact that food is everywhere and extremely plentiful, okay? In the past, it would have been a disadvantage to have a fast metabolism. I mean, if my body is burning 4,000 calories a day, and it didn't slow down by living in a hunter-gatherer society, I would die. I mean, how would I find 4,000 calories every single day? It would be almost impossible. But in modern societies, it becomes an advantage. When you look at studies on sugar, when you look at studies on processed foods, when you look at studies on, inflammatory fats, all the stuff that we know is bad for you, right? How bad it is for you actually dramatically reduces when your calories are low. That doesn't mean it's still good for you, But I can eat a lot of sugar in a low-calorie environment. It's way less bad for my body. It's less inflammatory, causes less problems than if I have a lot of sugar in a high-calorie environment. And what I mean by that is, in the context, is how many calories I'm burning, right? So when my body's burning, I can get away with and survive the everyday world much more. And then here's the other thing, and this is quite interesting now. And by the way, one of the reasons why resistance training has never been viewed as a great form of exercise for health is there's many reasons, but one of the main reasons was very few studies were ever done on resistance training and health. They were never the studies that we see on resistance training and visceral body fat. By the way, they show that resistance training is superior for that, even fat around the heart and heart health, right? The studies on insulin resistance and cognitive performance and bone density. Resistance training now is being shown in all these studies to be superior. But if we go back 15 years and more, there were no studies on resistance training at all. The only studies you would find were on resistance training and strength athletes, Olympic lifters. Before that, if a researcher was going to study a form of exercise, they always picked cardiovascular activity. So that's all we ever saw. There was no information on resistance training or strength and health, right? But here's what we know now. One of the best single predictors of all-cause mortality, and I love these studies because they blow everybody's minds, and it's great because the medical community now is starting to really, I guess, wake up to this, and they're starting to talk about this, right? If you were to pick one single test, one single metric that could predict all-cause mortality, almost nothing compares to a simple strength test. And they've done this with a grip test, and they've done this with people being able to stand up off the ground without holding on to anything. A strength test is a better predictor of all-cause mortality than a blood lipid test or a blood pressure test or any other single test. Now, of course, the best way to predict all-cause mortality is a combination of things. But this just goes to show you how important it is to maintain your strength. And when we look at, again, what's happening now in modern times, I mean, there was a study that came out that showed that college males today have the grip strength that their grandfathers had, or that men in their 60s had in the 80s. This is how weak that we have become. And then, of course, there's popular media, which completely mischaracterized resistance training. I mean, some of the earliest popular, media examples of resistance training were, the beach movies of the 50s and 60s, where they showed these big, oiled up, stiff, bodybuilders that were self-absorbed and they were all, stupid. And back in those days, by the way, some of your younger listeners might not know this, but, in the 50s and 60s, and even in the 70s, and maybe even in the early 80s, lots of coaches told their athletes to not lift weights, said, it's going to make you muscle bound, you're going to get tight, it's going to reduce your athletic performance. Now, one of the things I love about athletics is it's objective. You win or you lose. So eventually a team that over, people start to see what they're doing and say, okay, well, what are they doing? Well, these days, you would be very impressed to find an athlete that doesn't lift weights. So there's a success story right there, right? Even golfers today lift weights because it improves athletic performance across the board. But geez, I mean, a few decades ago, it was like, don't lift weights. It's going to make you slower. It's going to make you tighter. So there's a lot of this, and then of course with women, oh boy, I don't think anybody has suffered more from this misinformation than women. The earliest examples of resistance training were always these extreme examples of bodybuilders. I know, Pumping Iron was a documentary that came out in the 70s. Arnold Schwarzenegger, obviously he's very charismatic, bigger than life. And so people identified resistance training as like pro bodybuilder, right? Like you look like this huge, humongous, veiny, whatever. And, the truth is, by the way, and I love telling people this because it's funny how the average person doesn't understand this, but the ability to build that much muscle is akin to seeing somebody that's probably 7'5", right? So how often, and forget the NBA, because the NBA is a collection of just genetic anomalies. How often have you ever seen anybody in real life that's over 7'5", right? I don't think I ever have, maybe once, and I remember it because it stood out like crazy, right? That's how rare the kind of muscle building genetics that can build the kind of muscle that pro bodybuilders have exist. So if you're watching or listening to this, don't worry. You could try, you could do all you want. You could take all the anabolic steroids in the world and you won't get anywhere near as muscular as Arnold Schwarzenegger or especially the pro bodybuilders of today. But then of course you add on top of that all the drugs that they use and all that stuff. The average person, what they could expect from resistance training is a very lean, sculpted, firm, shapely physique. And the average woman, we'll go back to that, the average woman can expect curves, tightness, tone, and a very fast metabolism. And they could do this for years and they wouldn't look, I've never had a female client come to me and say, I'm building too much muscle. It just doesn't happen, but they've sold that, don't do this because it's going to make you look like the next bodybuilder. Instead, what you need to do is, 500 reps of this, circuit training thing or this urban hip hop, dance class or run for long distances. The reality is the exact opposite of what most of these people should be doing. What they should be doing is lifting weights and trying to get stronger. It'll give them exactly what they're looking for.
Yeah, I love in the book you mentioned that in your personal experience and your colleagues at Mind Pump and these decades of experience that you guys have, you've seen resistance training kind of normalize, to use a broad strokes term, the estrogen and progesterone balance in women. I thought that was really, really cool because I don't want to be sexist. I will just make an objective observation that when I go to the gym, it's a lot of times it's women on the ellipticals. And when I'm on the beach, a lot of times it's women running. And I'm thinking, okay, this is analogous to the way that women view meat. I think that women have this perspective like meat is going to make me too masculine or meat is going to make me too muscular and I want to be feminine. And as men, we appreciate femininity in women. There's an interesting polarity there. But I think in both of these cases, those mainstream perceptions that women are inculcated with are wrong. That resistance training, like you said, in your experience, will not make women into overly muscled, mustachioed people. They're not going to turn women into men by having you lift weights. It's just going to, probably be good because it builds muscle, which is important for, as we talked about, insulin sensitivity, glucose disposal, metabolism, and it's going to probably do really great things for your estrogen and progesterone balance.
Yes, and it'll give you the curves that you're looking for. What the average woman is looking for when they're working out is they want to get lean, but they also want to have shape, right? You don't want to just be, skinny, what they call skinny fat. You want to have some curve. You have nice glutes and hamstrings and nice, toned back and a nice toned midsection. Well, that's what resistance training creates. It's funny. When I used to, so for years, I managed in, big box gyms, right? I grand opened some clubs and I managed these gyms. And this was often the conversation that I would have with new potential members. They would walk in, and if they were women, we would talk about the value of resistance training because I was a trainer as well. And I would always get these objections. Oh, no, I don't want to lift weights. I'm not trying to get big or, no, I just want to lose weight. That's not what I'm interested in. And so what I would do is when we were talking about this is I would pause and I'd say, let me call someone into my office. And then I'd get on the intercom and I'd say,
Mm-hmm.
Attention staff, will so-and-so please come to my office. And I would call one of my female trainers. And in would walk in this, there was one in particular I can remember specifically, 5'2", very small, great posture, like what you would think is like the perfect toned bikini body person walking in, right? So she would walk in, and then I'd say to this new potential member, I'd say, look, we're going to try something, okay? I want you to guess her body weight. And if you come within 10 pounds of her actual body weight, I'll give you 6-month membership for free. So they'd say, okay, let's do this. So I'd say, okay, how much do you think she weighs? And they'd say, oh, she weighs 105 pounds, or she weighs, 95 pounds or something like that. So then we'd walk over to the scale, and my 5'2" trainer would step on it, and she would be like 135 pounds. And I'd say, okay, the reason why you think she's so light is because she's so small. But the reason why the scale says 135 pounds is because she has muscle. And muscle is dense. It doesn't take up much space. And then I'd follow up and say, could you tell this potential client what you had for breakfast and lunch? And she'd say, breakfast I had a 6-egg omelet and some sausage and whatever. And then for lunch, I had, a burrito from Chipotle. And they'd be like, how can she eat this much? This is insane. I said, well, all that muscle burns a tremendous amount of calories. And resistance training tells the body it doesn't need to be so efficient with calories. And this is an important thing to talk about, because sometimes I'll get people who will say, oh, you know what? The study showed that a pound of muscle only burns an extra 10 calories or something like that. So it's not that big of a deal, which even if it were that, that's still a big deal. You add 5 pounds of muscle, even if it were just 50 calories a day, you do the math, that's 10, 15 pounds of body fat a year. But it's actually more complicated than that, right? The human metabolism is extremely complex. It's actually the second most complex thing that we know of in the universe. I'd say the first thing is the brain. The second thing would be mammalian metabolism. And the metabolism does some pretty interesting things. It's not as straightforward as I have this much lean body mass, I have this much, and therefore I burn this many calories. Your body can actually choose to become more or less efficient with calories of the same body mass that you have, right? So you can have someone with the same body mass as someone else, and their body can actually be more efficient with calories than this other person and burn less calories. Now, what causes that? Well, one of the things that causes that is whether or not your body thinks it needs to be more efficient or less efficient, right? When I'm lifting weights, I'm sending a signal to my body that says the priority is strength. That's the main stress, and the main solution to solving the stress is strength. It's not so worried about becoming efficient with calories, especially when you combine it with a high protein diet, especially when you combine it with a diet in which you're slowly increasing calories, which I talk about in the book. Now, when I'm doing lots of cardiovascular activity, the signal that I'm sending to my body is become efficient with calories, become more efficient. And I make that even stronger when I cut my calories on top of it. And the human body has an incredible capacity to do this. I mean, you could read about some of these interesting studies they've done on POWs where, they're definitely emaciated, definitely not much lean body mass, but they're surviving on hundreds of calories a day. And if we just did the math, it wouldn't make any sense. It wouldn't even be enough to support their organs, let alone their bone and the little bit of muscle they have. But the body has this interesting capacity to become more or less efficient with calories by either producing more heat or doing more, more complex things through metabolism. So resistance training it tells your body to burn more calories all the time. So that trainer that I used as the example, it's like, she's 135 pounds, tiny, sculpted, and she can eat a lot of food. And this is wonderful. And, one of the other awesome things about this is the average person can accomplish a tremendous amount of this with a few days a week of resistance training. Honestly, like, you can actually get pretty far. You can actually get pretty advanced with 3 days a week. A 3-day-a-week full body routine can build, with somebody who's very consistent, very good with their diet, a remarkably, incredible looking physique with 3 days a week. You really can't do that with other forms of exercise. And to make it even more impressive, although no form of exercise produces permanent results, right? Like, one of the problems with exercise, you have to keep doing it, right? That's a common thing people will say. Your body's always going to adapt to what you're doing. But if we could pick a form of exercise that produces the most permanent form of results, well, it's resistance training, because here's the beauty of it. When you build muscle, you increase the amount of, so if I gain 5 pounds of muscle, I got more muscle mass, but I also increase the number of satellite cells in muscle, and I developed something called muscle memory. And muscle memory means that if I lose that muscle, gaining it back the second time around is much easier. If you're a guy, let's say you had a guy who was very consistent with resistance training, and he was really, really on it, and let's say he gained 20 pounds of muscle in a year, which, by the way, is a tremendous amount of muscle for a man to gain in a year. But let's just say he was able to do that. He gained 20 pounds of muscle. And then let's say something happened, I don't know, he stopped working out, and he lost all that muscle, all 20 pounds, over the course of 2 months or 3 months. And then let's say he got back into exercise and decided to gain it back. It took him a year to build that 20 pounds of muscle. He gained it right back in a couple months. Okay? That's one of the incredible hallmarks and advantages of resistance training. In fact, there was a recent study where they compared two groups of people. One group did resistance training for 3 weeks and then would take a week off and then repeat the cycle, 3 weeks on, 1 week off. Compared it to a group that did consistent resistance training every single week. At the end of the 16-week study, what they found were very similar results. Okay? You would not find that with other forms of exercise. If the primary benefit of exercise, like let's say cardio, is the calories that are being burned while I'm doing it, the second I stop, that's it. It's gone. Not only that now, but now whatever I'm eating now is being stored as body fat. So for those reasons, and the reason why I call it the resistance training revolution is because when you look at the issues that we're dealing with in modern societies and the context of modern living, no form of exercise comes close to resistance training for solving those things. And again, I want to be clear, I'm not saying other forms of exercise don't have value, but if you only picked one and you're only going to exercise 2 or 3 days a week, resistance training by far is going to give you the most bang for your buck.
Now, it's awesome. I totally agree. It makes me think about this equation, calories in, calories out. And when people talk about that, I've always been a little bit bothered because I feel like it's a huge oversimplification.
Yes.
And what you're really saying now, and I think that we agree on this, is that the quality, and this is something I've said also in the past, the quality of the calories in, that equation is too simple because the quality of the calories in affect the amount of calories that you oxidize, and everything you do in your day affects the number of calories you oxidize. So this is what we've talked about so far in the podcast. If you do resistance training, if you lift heavy things, that activity alone will affect the number of calories you oxidize in a disproportionate way to the number of calories you actually burn while you're doing that activity, right? And similarly, the quality of the food you eat can affect the calories you burn on the back end. So you can have changes in your metabolism, this complex equation that we talked about. Your metabolism can be radically altered by the quality of the food you eat and the quality of the movements and activities you do. So I feel like, I appreciate calories in, calories out. And I want people to understand that calories out is malleable. It's not just and it's very dependent on the way you live your life. And the other thing we're almost saying here, and I think we probably are actually saying this, is that by doing cardiovascular exercise, especially cardiovascular exercise in excess, you can potentially reduce the amount of calories you're oxidizing. So, and people may think, oh, I'm oxidizing calories by doing all this time on the elliptical, but long term, you're actually reducing the calories out. So I don't debate that it's all thermodynamics and a caloric deficit. I just want people to understand that it's a much more nuanced equation than we're being presented with it as, because we see shows like The Biggest Loser, and I talked about this when I had Herman Poncer on the podcast, and we talked about this, the Hadza, and this constrained energy model. And like you said, there's this muscle memory. Like if you lose the muscle, you can gain it back. But one of the craziest studies we talked about with Herman, was this study by Kevin Hall. And the Biggest Loser is like the perfect example of what not to do. They're starving people and just putting them on ellipticals. I don't know how much resistance training they do on the show. I've never watched it, but they're definitely over-exercising people. And when they lost all this weight, they gained it all back and more. It's just, we need to, I think in order to get fat loss, we need to leverage this calories in, calories out equation in the best way we can, which is doing the right activities, which is what you're suggesting now, like resistance training, and we'll get into exactly what people can do in a moment, and eating foods that are going to send the right signals to our body.
100%, like along those lines, right? If you took, let's say you're eating 2,000 calories a day, and let's say your protein intake is low. If you ate the same amount of calories, but you had, guess what happens to the other side of that formula? You actually burn more calories. We know this, right? If there's a higher protein intake, same calories, everything else being controlled, you affect that calories out side of the equation. Same thing with hormones, right? If I eat and exercise in a way to promote more anabolic hormones, I'm going to affect that calories out in a way, and I'm going to affect it, and the way it's affected is by the tissue that I'm building and the tissue that I'm losing. I mean, if you took a bunch of men and put them on a high-calorie diet, and I took half of them and gave them injections of testosterone, what you would see is less fat gain and more muscle gain in them versus the group that had their normal testosterone levels, right? And it's much more complex than that. So Even what we're talking about right now simplifies it a little bit, but really it's about how can I get my body to adapt in a way that's favorable so that I can get these results in a more permanent, long-term way. You know, you talk about The Biggest Loser. They all gain the weight back. And then afterwards, they're in a position that's even worse than they were before. You know, I talked about studies that show that cardio and diet results in half muscle, half fat loss. Well, when they gain the weight back, they don't gain that half muscle back. They gain it all as a body fat. So now, I lost 10 pounds. I gained back 10 pounds, but you're fatter than you were before. And your metabolism is slower than you were before. And it's funny, you know how many clients I've trained in this situation? You would be surprised. I get these people who they've lost and gained weight back so many different times. I mean, the reality is this, like, we don't have a weight loss problem at all in modern societies. We have a keep weight off problem. Everybody loses weight. Everybody just gains it back. And, you know, I've had so many clients come to me after going through this cycle. And now I have, you know, Mrs. Smith, who finally hired me, and, you know, she needs to lose 30 pounds, and I'm having her track her food because I'm trying to figure out how many calories she's averaging every single day in terms of how much she's burning. And I'm like, okay, you're 30 pounds overweight and you're burning about 1,600 calories, which includes, which a big part of that, by the way, is your metabolism. And if we eat anything over 1,600 calories, you gain weight. And in order to lose weight, I have to bring you under 1,600 calories. That's not sustainable. I'm not going to put Mrs. Smith on a 1,000 calorie diet to get her to lose 10 pounds and then what? Eat 1,000 calories for the rest of your life? No way. That's not going to work. So instead, what I do with her is I say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to build muscle. I'm going to slowly increase your calories. We're going to eat high quality protein. And over the course of months, I get her metabolism to burn 2,300 calories a day or 2,400 calories a day. Then from there, I can cut. Then from there, we can cut calories and the fat comes off her body. And then she's in a position where she's eating more than she did before, but she's leaner. What a great place to be. You know, Paul, I've had clients where I've actually gotten their metabolic rates to go up by over 1,000 calories a day. You know, people talk about, you know, you mentioned, you know, doing the cardio to burn the calories. I don't care. You could do an hour and a half of cardio every single day and think that this is going to do, burn a tremendous amount of calories. Pales in comparison to the amount of calories your metabolism burns on its own. You know, by the way, those cardio machines that you get on that tell you your calorie burn, they all lie, right? So you get on the elliptical and you do an hour on there. You burned 850 calories. It's bullshit. You didn't burn 850 calories, I promise you. You maybe burned 400 calories if you're lucky, if you went really, really hard. 400 calories is nothing, especially when you consider the hour of work that you put in to do it. Wouldn't you rather burn that 400 calories just by yourself all the time? What if you just did that every single day? I don't have to jump on a piece of equipment to do it. My body just burns it. So for these reasons, again, it's the form of exercise we need to pick. And then, you know, there's so many myths. Here's a great one. This is one of my favorite ones now to talk about. There's the myth that resistance training makes you tight, right? That it's not a good form of exercise for flexibility. Well, they've done studies, and what they found now is what I've seen in my career as a trainer, that when it comes to functional flexibility, and we'll define that in just a second, when it comes to functional flexibility, resistance training is the best form of exercise. Okay, so what is functional flexibility? Well, flexibility by itself is just range of motion. How far I can passively take my joints, right? So if I can sit in the splits, or if I can, you know, someone could pull my arm back over my head. That's my flexibility, right? But without any strength, what we have there is instability. So to give you an extreme example, you know, off air, we were talking about, you know, changes in our life. And I told you I have a 6-month-old at home, right? So I have a 6-month-old baby at home. Well, when I put him on his back, I mean, I could put his legs by his head. I could fold him all over the place, right? He's very flexible, very unstable. If I put any load on him, he's going to hurt himself. I don't even think he can't even support himself standing, you know, for long periods of time right now because he just doesn't have the strength, right? Functional flexibility is range of motion that you also have control and strength in. So it's the difference between sitting in a squat and sitting in a squat and be able to jump out of that squat, or having one of your kids jump on your back, or lifting a box off the ground out of that position. Functional flexibility is what mobility is. Owning ranges of motion is what prevents injury. Range of motion by itself can actually oftentimes increase instability and increase injury. This is why the studies on static stretching have shown that static stretching before exercise increases risk of injury, right? So when I was a kid, the way that we warmed up before we worked out was we did static stretching, right? You touch your toes and you hold your quad, your leg back to stretch your quad. And then I remember in the 90s, these studies came out and said, oh, wow, when athletes warm up like this, they hurt themselves more often. Well, the reason being is when you static stretch, you actually tell the central nervous system to relax its signal. You increase your range of motion, but now you have less strength in that range of motion. So if, God forbid, you move in that new range of motion, especially with any kind of force or speed or load, boom, you tear a muscle or you hurt one of your joints. What resistance training does, especially proper resistance training, full range of motion resistance training, is it builds strength within these long ranges of motion, so you get this improved mobility. So it's not going to make you a gymnast. You're not going to be able to contort your body like a cirque performer, but for the kind of flexibility and mobility that we need in everyday life, when you're reaching back in the back seat because your kid spilled something, or you're picking up something off the ground, or you're throwing a frisbee or a baseball, for that kind of functional flexibility, resistance training is the best form of exercise, and will produce the lowest risk of injury in terms of doing these activities.
Yeah, I totally agree. So there's a couple of things I want to make sure we hit on here. In your book, there were some really striking studies, and we've touched on this before, but I want to circle back just to drive this point home. Can you tell us about the November 2017 study in the Mayo Clinic proceedings that looked at coronary artery calcification in people who exercised a lot versus a moderate amount? That's a super interesting one. And then I want to talk about the Copenhagen City Heart Study, because I'm fascinated by this issue of longevity. Within the health space, you and I both know people who would recommend limiting protein because they are fearful of the longevity, right? And people have concerns about mTOR and IGF-1. And it's important to note that resistance training triggers the mammalian target of rapamycin. You want muscle, and I've had Gabrielle Lyon on the podcast. Her sort of really appropriate adage is muscle is the organ of longevity. And yet this is so, it's been propagandized too much in society for people to think you should limit protein because you don't want muscle, or you don't want to turn on mTOR. And similarly, if we're talking about mTOR and overactivating mTOR, we must say, like, if you don't want to overactivate mTOR, you better not lift weights. So let's talk about the cardiovascular study, and then the Copenhagen City Heart Study is after that.
Yeah, so we talk about the when they're looking at these calcifications in the arteries in the heart, right? This is what leads to your heart attack. What they find is over-exercise damages the heart, actually ages it faster and causes more of this to happen. By the way, we've actually seen this in other studies, maybe not as specifically, but when you look at long-distance runners, long-distance endurance athletes, they actually have worse longevity outcomes than sometimes than the average American, because they're causing so much oxidative stress to their heart. You want to train your body in a way that makes you, obviously you want to improve your quality of life in the moment, but you also want to improve your longevity. And over-exercising, especially over-application of cardiovascular activity, is a wonderful way to reduce longevity, especially when we're talking about heart health. Now, back to what you were saying about mTOR and IGF-1. What's funny about that is people take those mTOR and IGF-1 so out of context, right? So let's talk about another hormone just to illustrate kind of what we're talking about, right? Testosterone. Testosterone is connected to longevity. So men with low levels of testosterone tend to not live as long as men with higher levels of testosterone. Of course, we're talking within reason, right? We're not talking about men who take exogenous testosterone and elevate it to 15 times levels. But within reason, higher testosterone levels are linked to virility, muscle mass, reduced risk of diabetes, reduced risk of cognitive decline, and just overall longevity, right? Low testosterone, the opposite. Okay, so we know more healthy levels of testosterone, natural levels of testosterone, connected to longevity. Okay, well, if you are in a pro-prostate cancer state, testosterone can drive prostate cancer. So if I took things out of context, I could say, we want to lower our testosterone levels to lower our prostate cancer risk, which is silly, absolute silly. So in a pro-cancer state, IGF-1, growth hormone, mTOR drives cancer growth. But that's the wrong way to look at it, right? If you're in a pro-cancer state, all bets are off. We're looking at something completely different, and we need to treat the body completely different. If you're not in a pro-cancer state, mTOR, IGF-1, these are youth signals. They promote longevity, health. They reduce fat gain. They build muscle, improve. So we can't just look at things and then extrapolate and forget the context. That's silly. For the average person who doesn't have cancer growing in their body right now, for the average person, having stimulating mTOR going to build muscle, improve longevity. IGF-1 going to do the same thing. If you have cancer in your body, if I go to the doctor and the doctor's like, "Hey Sal, you have liver cancer." Okay, I might not want to stimulate those things in my body. By the way, if we're talking about context, low mTOR, low IGF-1, low testosterone, also connected to higher rates of other types of cancer. So really what you're looking for is a healthy body, and in that context, then those things are very, very good. In the state of, just like, it reminds me of the high protein studies where they're like, oh, look, people who eat lots of protein are at higher risk for whatever, but they're not looking at the fact that they're eating tremendous amounts of calories, heavily processed foods. They don't exercise, and it's probably not the protein that's causing the problem. So we got to look at things in context. And really what you want in your body, what you want is you want things that promote a youthful body, both hormonally, physically, chemically. We want, more androgen receptors in our muscles. We want youthful levels of testosterone, I mean, it's funny because Western medicine kind of knows this, like women, and I don't think this is the right solution, but boy, do people feel better by doing this. Women suffering from, some of the effects of aging, sometimes doctors will put them on hormones to make them feel better. Same thing with men, right? You could do this naturally, just through telling your body, putting your body in this pro-tissue environment, telling your body to build muscle. It's one of the best ways to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's such an important piece, and I love that you made that distinction that these molecules, these signals, mTOR, IGF-1, these are longevity and youthfulness and suppleness and muscles, in a healthy body. And we cannot take this out of context like it's done so often. And there was this study that you mentioned in your book, the Copenhagen City Heart Study, and they looked at moderate joggers, and I'm just cribbing your book here, who jogged an average pace of 3 to 4 hours a week. They had a threefold increase of dying early compared to light joggers who performed less physical activity, less than 2.5 hours a week. For strenuous joggers, the risk of dying was 9 times higher. Strenuous joggers ran at 7 miles per hour on average for more than 4 hours a week. I mean, that's just basically, it's such a striking finding that we need to not ignore this. Like over-exercising, over-chronic cardio basically puts you at the same risk of death and cardiovascular disease as somebody who's a couch potato. So we've talked about this in cardiology as like a U-shaped curve. Yep. If you're completely sedentary and you're sitting on the couch and you're doing nothing and you're eating processed seed oils and potato chips and processed food, you have a high rate of death from all cause and you have an increased rate of cardiovascular disease. And if you're over-exercising, you have a high rate of cardiovascular disease. I don't know why people haven't talked about these findings more, but it's really important to make that very clear to folks.
Yeah, and one of the other challenges with cardiovascular activity is, I remember, years ago I was hiking in the hills here in Northern California, and as I was hiking, runners would pass me by, and I'm a trainer, so it's very difficult for me not to notice biomechanics anytime somebody's doing something right. So, as I see people run by, I can see, oh, well, wow, their feet are really pronating, or oh my God, strong anterior pelvic tilt, and nobody was running in a way where I would say, I mean, and let's be very clear, the human body did evolve to run. In fact, if you look at the human body, we evolved to be pretty damn good runners. One of the only, in fact, physically speaking, we're pretty good at it compared to other animals. But that doesn't mean you just go pick up and run and you're going to be good at it. And I was watching people run. I'm like, why can't anybody run well? And I said, oh, I know why. It's because nobody views running or cardio as a skill. Everybody views it as a way to get fatigued, to get tired and sweat. So nobody thinks I'm going to go run better. They think I'm just going to run until I get really tired. Okay. With traditional resistance training, now I'm not talking about the wrong kind of resistance training. Actually, I wouldn't even call it resistance training. The kind they do on The Biggest Loser, where they are using weights, but they're going from one exercise to another, and they're doing 5 million reps, and they're doing cardio with weights. Forget that. Traditional resistance training places a special emphasis on skill, technique, and form, right? So when you go work out in the gym, if you're working out and you're doing it in a traditional way, which is the way you should be doing it if you want to do it the way I'm talking, you're getting better at squats. You're getting better at overhead presses. You're practicing the exercise. So really it lends itself very well to this kind of longevity that you can get through exercise, because again, when it's done the traditional way, I mean, even if you were to train with a bodybuilder, the bodybuilder's not going to say, have you do crappy form squats till you get tired. They say, no, we got to go light. That's not squat anymore. We need to see your form, your technique. And I actually talk about this in the book. I say, look, if you want to do this in a way that's going to give you the best results, both in the short term and the long term, treat it like practice. Don't treat it like a workout. So don't go to the gym and think, I'm going to get sore in my legs and sore in my back, but rather think to yourself, I'm going to get better at squats. I'm going to get better at rows. I'm going to get better at presses. I'm going to get better at, cable chops. I'm going to get better at all these different movements. And as you practice them and get better at them, you reap more from these movements, Resistance training also is a form of exercise that, when you're talking about cognitive health, brain health, I mean, this is really where it's head and shoulders, right? We talk about head and shoulders above others. We talked about insulin sensitivity, right? And how important that is for cognitive function. But there's more to that, okay? When I'm training my body, I'm training my central nervous system as much as I'm training my muscles. In fact, initial strength gains that come from resistance training, actually a majority of them come from your central nervous system, just learning how to fire more effectively and efficiently. So think of your CNS as like an amplifier, and your muscles are like speakers, right? I could have big speakers, but without a good amplifier, I'm not going to produce very much sound, right? So the CNS, including the brain, develops and builds just like muscles as you practice lots of these movements. Okay, when we look at other forms of exercise, they're tend to be characterized by repetitive movements that tend to be very limited, right? So running is running. It's one type of move. Same thing with cycling, same thing with swimming. I can even exercise like yoga and exercise, which are far more complex, but still there's a very, in comparison to resistance training, limited set of ways I'm moving, okay? But especially with cardio. With resistance training, there's thousands of exercises you could do for the body and an almost infinite way of doing each one of them, okay? I can move in every single different plane. So I'm not just working in the frontal plane. I can move in the sagittal plane. I can rotate. I can move from left to right. And while I'm performing the exercise, I'm not thinking about what I'm doing for dinner. And like when I'm on the bike, and I'm riding my cycle, I can think about it. I'm very present. I have to be present. I'm focused. I've got heavy load on me. I'm lifting this weight. I am focused on the technique. I'm focused on the movement. I'm developing proprioception. Proprioception is something that you lose as you age. That is one of the number one contributing factors to one of the biggest problems that can happen as you get older, which is falling, hurting yourself, right? Proprioceptive ability is very important. Resistance training develops that. I'm not just doing the same thing over and over again. I'm squatting, I'm pressing, I'm twisting, I'm curling, I'm rowing, I'm doing variations of varieties of it. In fact, with resistance training, it's encouraged to include variety in your routine to reap the best results. So from a brain development standpoint, I mean, when you look at physical therapists, for example, their primary form of exercise that they use to rehab people, including people in advanced age, is resistance training. I mean, I would work with advanced people advanced age all the time, and it was the resistance training that we would see these incredible cognitive improvements, or at the very least, I would see this very, very noticeable slowdown in cognitive decline.
And it speaks to all the things we've been talking about: longevity, brain-derived neurotrophic factor in the brain. We didn't touch on bone density, but resistance training has benefits there: hormonal balance, metabolism. The real way to lose fat by increasing your overall, sort of basal metabolic rate with the muscle burning calories all day long. Now, in the book, you draw a distinction between steady state cardio and high intensity cardio. And I want to just touch on this before we wrap up, because I think that there's something to be said for sprinting. And it seems like you guys appreciate that as well. So tell me about the difference here and what you think about sprinting, because I've talked a little bit about sprinting. I just want to let people know we've sort of referenced a lot of podcasts that I've done already in this one. If you're interested in visceral fat and the way that cardiovascular exercise or over steady state cardio will affect visceral fat, which is a good indicator of insulin resistance and overall metabolic health, listen to the episode with Sean O'Mara, who's also a fan of sprinting. We talked about Herman Poncer. You can listen to that episode. We talked about the episode with Gabrielle Lyon in terms of muscles. But I've really enjoyed sprinting occasionally, but I see it as like very powerful medicine.
Yeah. Okay, so you know how I talked about on The Biggest Loser how they were doing cardio with weights, right? So they were going from one exercise to another, no rest, lots of reps. Even though they're holding dumbbells, really what they're doing is steady state cardio with weights. Okay, sprinting is resistance training with cardio, okay? Really is what it is. Sprinting is stronger and more explosive. So the reason why when we see high intensity interval training, sprinting, jumping, explosive type cardiovascular activity, the reason why we see better visceral fat loss, more muscle preservation, better long-term effects from it, is because it's anaerobic. It's building strength and muscle like resistance training or similar to resistance training. Or to put it more clearly, you're doing resistance training with cardio. Now, there is one caveat with sprinting and those forms of exercise. Because they're explosive and because they require a high level of exertion in a short period of time, right? So when I talk about resistance training, I tend to promote controlled movement, slow, controlled, perfect form movement. Okay, when you're sprinting, the idea behind a sprint, what makes it a sprint is you're running as fast as you can for a short period of time. So here's the caveat. You better know how to run really well, and you better have good joints, and you better have a good, decent amount of mobility and strength, because if there's risks associated with running for injuring yourself, there's higher risks associated with doing it really hard and really fast. Now, if you can do it and you can do it well, excellent form of exercise. I say sprinting is one of the best forms of exercise. But when I take the average person and I'm going to train them, I don't incorporate sprinting until I've built a great base of strength, mobility, and movement. And then I slowly work them up to sprinting because it's such a fast athletic movement. Now, I do think it's important, if I were to construct a perfect workout program, there definitely would be a component of that in there, because it's a skill that you need to practice and not get rid of. You need to have it. I mean, in everyday life, there are situations where you need to move quickly. And, let's say you're walking and you step off a curb, or your kid runs the wrong way and you need to grab them or whatever. It is a skill. It is something that we should all probably be good at. But you do need to work yourself up to it because it's such a fast form of exercise with a, maximal exertion. If you don't move well, if you're not exercising now, if you don't have a good base of movement and strength, it's not appropriate.
But I think used properly, it can be super powerful for people, and it's sort of, I just wanted to clarify that so that people didn't think that we were completely saying never raise your heart rate, never do anything cardiovascular. That's not what we're saying here. Use
No,
it appropriately.
and also, let's be very clear. Training for specific athletic performance is very different than what we're talking about. If your goal is to do well in marathons, if your goal is to be a triathlete, you need to train that way, right? You need to have those things, okay? What I'm doing is I'm talking to the majority of people whose goals they could care less about, running a marathon in under 2 hours, or they could care less about doing what they want. Is I want to be lean, I want to look good, I want to not have pain, I want to be able to eat, go out on the weekend with my wife and enjoy a nice dinner with a glass of wine and not gain tons of body fat from it. I want to live a long time. Like those types of things, those are the type of people that I'm really talking about. If I was talking to an athlete, if you were telling me that hey Sal, I'm going to compete in this, this century race or whatever, I'm going to say, well, you need to do a lot of endurance training to get good at that, and we'll put a little bit of resistance training in there to prevent injury and to, maintain your mobility. But if I'm talking to the average person, it's a very, very different conversation. And also, I do want to say this: there are other benefits to exercise that I don't want to make light of. If you're somebody that finds and pleasure from a morning run, if it relieves stress for you, if it's your favorite thing to do, and if you don't do that, you're probably not going to exercise. I'm going to tell you to go ahead and do that. I mean, at the end of the day, so long as it's appropriate and not overdone, activity is better than no activity. And at the end of the day, the one you do consistently will benefit you more than the one you do inconsistently. So, if you really love something and it's just part of your passion, you enjoy it, there's nothing wrong with doing it, so long as it's done appropriately. But again, if you're like most people, you just want to look good, live longer, be lean, be able to eat more, have youthful hormones, have a great libido, all that stuff, and you're like, look, I'm going to work out. Honestly, I'm going to do maybe 2 days a week, and that's about it. Like, what should I do? Lift weights, do resistance training.
And this is a great point. I think we can tell people, if you enjoy doing marathons, triathlons, etc., great. But don't delude yourself into thinking that that's going to create optimal long-term health.
Oh, yeah.
It's a trade-off, right?
Oh, yeah. There's maximum performance and longevity are not in the same category. I don't care what, by the way, I don't care what sport you pick. Maximum strength. Go look at like extreme powerlifters, right? They don't have the best longevity either. Performance at any level, at extreme levels, there's a trade-off. Even maximum performance in academics or business, right? You're probably going to trade off some longevity. So that's not the people we should not. And this is another mistake that we've made with media, is the people that we look to as examples of health are these extreme athletes, like, oh, the NFL quarterback, or this NBA forward, or this whatever. Actually, if you look at their longevity, it's terrible compared to people exercise and eat in a way that produce longevity. So don't look at the extremes for ways to train and eat to improve your quality of life and your longevity, unless your goal is to be at that extreme level, in which case I'd say go for it.
Exactly. And so as we wrap up here, I want to let people know that in the book you've got, you make these arguments about how to use cardio if you're going to use it, and why resistance training is so critical. And I just can't help but think of my 70-year-old mother who sits on the recumbent bike 15 to 20 minutes a day, but does zero resistance training. And so I'm going to send her a copy of your book, and maybe she'll listen to this podcast. I just want to get her lifting some weights. And my father, same thing, but in the book, you've got, exercises for people. You talk about how many reps, how many sets, and you kind of lay it out. So there's all sorts of blueprints in the book where you're saying, here is how Sal and your colleagues at Mind Pump, collectively, the Brain Trust, might design a resistance training program for somebody that wants to just achieve those goals. There's a lot of stuff in there, people. So I encourage everybody to check it out. And
yeah,
that was awesome.
I put three three versions of workouts in there. One is for people without any exercise equipment, so they just have resistance bands in their body. Then there's one that's just dumbbells. And then there's one in there for people with a full home gym that includes barbells and dumbbells. And I do talk about the structure of resistance, because it's very important that you don't just use dumbbells and barbells and resistance bands, but you do them in a way that promotes the things that that we're talking about. So I do give those examples. I do give those workouts. And the book I wrote it specifically for people like your mom, people who have no idea, what real resistance training is. All they know is the stigma. And I communicate in a way that, is easy to understand and gets them to kind of go, oh, let me try this out. But I also wrote the book for people like you, Paul, experts and professionals in this field, to arm you with the vernacular and the explanations that I have found to be very effective at convincing the average person. Because here's one thing that I'll say that being a personal trainer for over 2 decades makes me an expert at. So I know fitness, I know nutrition, but there's definitely fitness, you probably know more about the intricacies of exercise, and there's definitely nutrition experts that know. But one thing that you get really good at when you train people day in and over almost 2.5 decades is I can communicate fitness in an extremely effective way, because I had to hone that skill talking to everyday people who don't want to exercise and who don't want to stay consistent, who, the people that we fail over and over and over again. And so if you're a fitness professional or a health expert, or you already know that weight training is amazing, this book will arm you. It will arm you with the ways you can communicate this, with the studies, and it's a great way to set you up so you can talk to people who've probably already been resisting what you've been saying for a long time. So it's really for those two types of people.
So where can people find the book and find more of your stuff, Sal?
Thank you. So the book you can find anywhere they sell books, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Target, but you can also find it at theresistancetrainingrevolution.com. And then if you want to find me, I'm always on my podcast, of course, Mind Pump. And then you can find me personally on Instagram at MindPumpSal.
Okay. And Sal is a curator of great memes, just so people know.
Thank you. By the way, I learned, you know what's funny? I learned that as a trainer. When I was talking about communicating, how you learn how to communicate more effectively. This is how we organized Mind Pump. One thing that I learned as a trainer was I would be way more effective if I could also be entertaining. Like, if my clients showed up because they liked me, they're more likely to show up than if they just came to work out. So that's why I post comedy memes, and this is why on the podcast, the first half of the show is current events and fun conversation, because I'm getting more people in, and then I sneakily attack them with good fitness and health information.
I love it. So, Sal, what is the most radical thing that you have done recently, my friend?
Oh my God, radical. Gosh, let me think. I do a lot of radical things with supplements. I will say this, I like to self-experiment quite a bit. So recently, and this might not be any news to you, but for a long time now, I've been reading on the cognitive performance benefits of nicotine. It's kind of interesting. Nicotine is obviously the addictive part of cigarettes. I don't smoke cigarettes, no. That's not a very good way of delivering nicotine if interested in health. But nicotine is delivered through lozenges, can actually have some pretty interesting cognitive performance boosting effects. Still addictive, so it's addictive like caffeine. But anyway, I've been self-experimenting just to see what the effects are, and it's kind of remarkable. But I do that a lot with myself when it comes to supplements.
We're all a test tube, right? We can experiment. I mean, it's powerful stuff. I haven't done much nicotine, but I've got a lot of friends that use it, Ben Greenfield and others, and it's a neurotransmitter. It's powerful. It's certainly a gas pedal to the human brain. Have you experimented with like organ supplements like we make at Heart and Soil?
Oh yeah. Well, organ meats, I notice improvements in performance when I consume them.
Awesome.
Partially because they're so dense in nutrients. They're like, I can't think of a more nutrient-dense food than an organ meat. In fact, you might even be able to overdo it and give yourself too much. But So I love organ meats. Of course, the taste oftentimes turns people off. So organ supplements is a great way to deliver it. But I also like eating organ meats like liver or chicken liver in particular for the cholesterol. There's an interesting strength and muscle building effect from dietary cholesterol. If you're not, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the studies are pretty interesting and remarkable. And so long as you are not one of those hyper, sensitive people to dietary cholesterol, which a lot of us are not, bumping your cholesterol intake, man, you'll see strength and muscle gains from doing that.
Well, I think even the hyper responder to cholesterol thing, I think is a misunderstanding of the physiology, because in the people that see their cholesterol rise in milligrams per deciliter, they're just getting larger LDL particles. So it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I'm not really concerned about that, even from my medical perspective.
Cool.
But thanks for mentioning that, because I agree. I mean, I have a pretty good amount of cholesterol in my diet, and I think dietary cholesterol is super important for humans. And people can refer back to all the podcasts I've done with Dave Feldman and Jack Wolfson and Nadir Ali if they have questions about cholesterol and lipid dynamics.
So. Oh man, if you want to see yourself, if you want to try this out, if you're watching or listening to this, and you want to see like a significant strength gain in a short period of time, try consuming 800 or 900 or 1,000 milligrams of cholesterol a day, which is like 8, 9, 10 eggs or egg yolks. Do that for 6 weeks, 7 weeks, 8 weeks. It's remarkable. It's incredible what kind of strength gains you get from doing that.
Yet this is the thing that we're told is horrible for us. Clearly, the paradigm is a little bit limited. But anyway, thank you for coming on, my friend, and hopefully we can eat some steak and liver soon.
Thanks, Paul.
Hail lobster. Hail lobster.